The 3 most common leadership mistakes. Being a leader means knowing how to protect your team so they are able to perform at their very best. Your job is to provide guidance, inspiration, and a safety net, which in turn will inspire them to take action and to contribute the best effort they are capable of. When everyone gives their very best, the team works. But while that's what good leadership is really about, this is something that is lost on many people. Unfortunately, a large proportion of leaders have the completely wrong idea about what being a leader actually means. As such, they can end up causing more harm than good. In this presentation, I'll be discussing 3 of the most common leadership mistakes that you can learn from and avoid. 1. Shouting. Being a leader does not mean blustering and yelling until you get your point across. It does not mean reprimanding dissidents in front of the entire office. Remember that being a leader does not mean you're in charge of someone or that you have the right to admonish them. Rather, it means that they have agreed to follow your instruction in this specific context. Don't let the power go to your head. A good leader doesn't need to shout to get their point across. And if things aren't working out, you simply part ways on good terms. 2. Threatening. Similarly, many leaders take the unfortunate approach of trying to terrify their followers into getting work done. They might point out that they have the power to terminate that person's employment, or they might threaten them with more work. There are lots of reasons that this doesn't work. For one, it means that those team members are going to be put in the wrong state of mind and not feel particularly like team players. Additionally, this kind of stress can actually dampen creativity due to chemical changes in the brain. 3. Micromanaging. A manager who focuses on every single detail of the work being done and attempts to wrestle control away from their team will only end up making those team members feel undervalued, while removing any creatively rewarding aspects of the work. Not only that, but they will be wasting the talents of someone hired to do that job specifically, and they will be wasting a lot of time doing work and having conversations that could have been avoided. Why emotional intelligence is crucial for effective leadership. What is the most important feature of a great leader? Is it the ability to stay calm in a crisis, to bark orders, or to command respect and fear? No. The most important feature of a leader is to understand people. This comes down to emotional intelligence, the ability to understand, predict, and ultimately influence the emotions of others. There are many situations where this plays out. For example, when someone fails to do their best work repeatedly, you might be tempted to accuse them of being lazy. The emotionally intelligent manager, however, will understand that this person might be having problems at home, or they might simply not find the work they're doing rewarding. So you should ask, how can you make that work more intrinsically rewarding for them? This will get much better results than just storming and shouting. Likewise, if you're unhappy with something a staff member did, your job as an emotionally intelligent individual is to instruct them on what they did wrong, but in such a way as to not upset them or to make them feel undervalued. How to take control in an emotionally intelligent way. We've already seen that using the threat of punishment is an ineffective way to get staff to work harder, and that it will only cause them to be less productive and inventive in the way they approach tasks. But if coming down hard on your staff isn't the answer, then how do you compose yourself to create the image of a leader? The same goes for reprimanding staff. If you shout at them publicly, you will only create enemies and resentment. Instead, demonstrate that you're unhappy by talking through with them in private what they are doing well and how they can stand to improve. Make sure you make them feel valued and make sure they know that the issues are things that can be fixed. In a crisis, emotional intelligence becomes equally important. Perhaps the most important thing here is to remain calm and confident. You might not realize it, but you will set the thermostat, as it were, for the mood of the office. If you panic, then the office will panic. Whereas if you're calm and collected, so too will be the rest of the office. This is another form of emotional intelligence, the ability to take control over your own emotions and therefore to react in the best way possible. Why empathy is the most important leadership trait. If there is one thing that needs to change about the way most people approach leadership, it's their understanding of the role of empathy. You see, many people fail to recognize that there is a role for empathy after all. Their assumption is that they can produce great work through discipline, incentives, and organization. In fact, though, the main difference between a well-liked and respected leader and one who is completely ineffectual is their ability to empathize with staff and to understand them. Trying to get someone to do as they are told because you said so is a recipe for disaster. So too is reprimanding someone because they have failed to complete their work properly. While they might toe the line for fear of being fired, this won't create workplace satisfaction, and it will likely cause them to produce subpar work. Moreover, they might well start looking for alternative employment. When someone fails to get work in on time, then ask yourself, could something be going on in their personal lives that has prevented them from completing their best work? Did you provide clear instructions and enough time? Why isn't the work inherently motivating for them? Would they like to somehow change the way they are working? By answering these questions, you can address the root of the problem. Instead of feeling watched and bullied, the person now feels supported and encouraged. Immediately, this leaves them wanting to do better work for the organization that is looking after them. But it also means that you can work together in order to come up with a great solution that will help them to do their very best work every day. Now, you might give them more ownership or creative control over their work. You might give them a little bit of time off, or you might look into flexible working hours. Whatever the case, stopping to listen to your staff has now helped them to do the very best work they can do. That's far better than yelling at them so that they bury their head in the sand. This can have profound impacts on the productivity of one member of staff and on their relationship with you. But now if you multiply that across countless office workers, you can completely transform the culture and work environment for the better. Learn to listen and to care. Why every manager should be trained in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, EQ, is a quotient used to measure how in touch someone is with their emotions. This is fairly abstract, though, and there are methodological problems with measuring it, even more so than with IQ. But while that's true, it is also widely accepted that EQ is something that exists, and that is extremely important when it comes to taking charge and instructing your followers. It's something that every manager should be trained in. To illustrate this point, consider a real-life example of someone who was put in a leadership with poor emotional intelligence. This person was an editor whose job it was to read through writing from journalists, and then to make corrections ready to print. If the corrections were extensive, they had the option to send the work back to the person who wrote it. For their very first job, the editor received a large article that a journalist had written over the course of several days. The writer was proud of this work and had worked extremely hard. But the editor found several faults with the formatting, the grammar, and more. So what they did was to make a public example of the writer. They pulled them up to their desk in a crowded office and then explained loudly to the entire team how they had failed to listen to the writer's guidelines, how they had used the wrong capitalization in their title, and how they had failed to properly link out to other websites, and how they had clearly missed several typos. They made no mention of the many positive points of the article, and they were rude about the overall quality. The result? The writer felt completely underappreciated for the work they had put in. Not only that, but they felt humiliated in front of their coworkers, and they felt especially aggravated that this was coming from someone brand new that they had never worked with before. The next time that the writer had to deliver a similar piece of work, they spent significantly less time and effort on it, and therefore delivered an inferior product. Not only that, but they took much longer than necessary to correct the mistakes. How could this have been handled? The editor could have spoken to the writer privately. They could have started by thanking the writer for their work and pointed out some of the qualities that made it a great piece of work. Then they could have mentioned that there were a couple of small issues, and if that they could be corrected as soon as possible, then the work would be good to go. The difference here is huge, and over the course of countless interactions and countless months, it can completely transform a workplace. EQ is critical to leadership.